SpongeBob SquarePants Mysteries, Ooze in the Ocean. Chapter 11. Now we were getting somewhere. I was as excited as a kid on opening day at Glove World. Heck, I was as excited as me at Glove World. Today's whatchamacallit worked like a charm. It led us straight to another clue. SpongeBob and Patrick both looked down at the ground where the radioactive ooze finder was pointing. And there they saw it. Another trail of green ooze. Do me a favor, Patrick, SpongeBob said. Block the light. You got it, Patrick said, leaning over the trail. Sure enough, it glowed green in his shadow, just like the trails behind the Shady Shoals rest home and William's mansion. It matches the other tracks, SpongeBob said, excited. I think you know what we have to do now, Patrick. Break for lunch? Patrick guessed. Nope. Reminisce about the good old days? I think not. Patrick thought hard. Follow the trail? 100%! SpongeBob cried. You got it, partner. Let's follow this trail and see where it takes us. Maybe it'll lead us straight to a horribly dangerous mutant slug. I withdraw my suggestion, Patrick said, not liking the sound of such an encounter. But it was too late. SpongeBob was already following the track like a bloodhound fish, bent over and scurrying along over the sand. Reluctantly, Patrick followed him. The winding green trail led them farther away from Bikini Bottom until they were in an empty expanse devoid of buildings, signs, or roads. Tumbleweeds rolled by. The flat land started to give way to foothills and mountains. Oh, how much farther? Patrick asked, panting. I don't know, partner, SpongeBob said. We've just got to keep following this trail until it runs cold. Patrick shivered. Oh, I'm cold already. Maybe we should go back. But SpongeBob kept right on following the trail as it snaked between rolling hills and through narrow canyons. The sky turned dark as though a storm might be approaching. The slimy track started to glow in the gloom. Just as Patrick was about to insist on turning back, he spotted something just ahead. SpongeBob, staring down at the green ooze, almost ran right into it. SpongeBob, stop! Patrick shouted, grabbing his partner by the back of his trench coat. SpongeBob's polished black shoes were right on the edge of a huge hole gaping in the ground before them. Flailing wildly, he circled his arms, trying to keep from falling into the deep pit. Whoa! Whoa! He lost his grip on the radioactive ooze finder, and it tumbled down into the inky darkness. Whoa! SpongeBob yelped. Patrick tugged on SpongeBob's coat, and they fell backward onto the ground, breathing. Patrick tugged on SpongeBob's coat, and they fell backward onto the ground, away from the hole. They sat there in the dirt and sand, breathing hard. Phew! SpongeBob exhaled, wiping his brow. That was a close one. He turned to Patrick. Thanks, buddy. Don't mention it, Patrick said. Unless, you want to. SpongeBob crawled over and peered down into the hole. This isn't just a hole. It's a tunnel. He picked up a clump of dirt near the entrance to the tunnel and sniffed it. And it's been dug recently. Who dug it? Patrick wondered. A clam? Walking around the rim of the enormous hole, SpongeBob said, I don't think so. It's way too big for a clam. Even a giant clam. He lay on the ground, running his hand along the inside wall of the tunnel. See these ridges? They follow a corkscrew pattern. That's how you can tell the tunnel wasn't dug by a machine. It must have been made by a living animal twisting its body through the soil. Sitting up, he rested his chin on his hand and his elbow in his other hand, thinking. And he held up his right index finger as if he'd come to a conclusion. I believe there's only one creature that could have possibly burrowed a tunnel this big. 2 giant clams? Patrick speculated. No, SpongeBob said, shaking his head. I believe this huge tunnel must have been digged by an Alaskan bullworm. Patrick shuddered. Oh! Everyone knew that an Alaskan bullworm was one of the most fearsome, horrifying beasts in the seven seas. It was as long as a freight train, as powerful as a typhoon. Its mouth, lined with sharp teeth, was so big that many had mistaken it for a cave, to their regret. It had two cold black eyes and a tongue the size of a cruise ship. Its roar was deafening, and its soul was merciless. Oh, an Alaskan bullworm! Patrick cried. Then we better get out of here! He started to run, but SpongeBob grabbed the back of his coat. Calm down, partner, SpongeBob said reassuringly. The digging's recent, but there's no sign of the worm anywhere. Believe me, if he were on his way back out of this tunnel, we'd hear him coming. Are you sure? Patrick asked nervously. Maybe this Alaskan bullworm is really sneaky. SpongeBob went back to the edge of the opening, knelt down and peered in. He thought maybe they should investigate further by climbing down into the tunnel and seeing where it led. He could also retrieve Sandy's radioactive ooze finder, but he wasn't sure they'd be able to climb back out. He hadn't thought to bring any rope with him, and he certainly didn't want to run into an Alaskan bullworm in the dark, even if he could hear it coming. He stood back up and looked around. Where could this tunnel possibly lead? All he saw were hills and mountains. There wasn't a building in sight. Dusting sand off his hands, he said, Well, Patrick, what do you make of all this? Make of all what? Patrick asked. SpongeBob made a sweeping gesture. All this! A trail of glowing green radioactive ooze that leads us nowhere except right into a barren wilderness? And at the end of the trail, a great big hole in the ground? The hole is the entrance to a long, dark tunnel to who knows where. Looking around, it seems like a gigantic tunnel to nowhere that could only have been dug by an Alaskan bullworm. SpongeBob smiled, pleased with his own summary of the situation. So those are the pieces. What do they add up to? Patrick chewed his lip thinking. Well, Patrick said slowly, Alaskan bullworms aren't slugs, right? Right, SpongeBob said. They're worms. Really big worms. And they don't leave trails of ooze, right? Correct? Patrick was feeling a little more confident. That was 2 right answers in a row. Possibly a new record for him. So Mutant Slug left the trail, Patrick concluded. But an Alaskan bullworm dug the tunnel at the end of the trail. Yes, SpongeBob said, picking up Patrick's line of reasoning as he paced, careful not to tumble into the tunnel. Then maybe the mutant slug, or someone with a mutant slug, brought the Alaskan bullworm here to dig the tunnel. Patrick looked skeptical. Brought the Alaskan bullworm here? Is that possible? How do you bring an Alaskan bullworm anywhere? They don't exactly follow your commands like a pet. They're wild animals. SpongeBob snapped his fingers. Unless this was a trained Alaskan bullworm. That's cuckoo talk, Patrick argued, shaking his head. You can't train an Alaskan bullworm. Shrugging his shoulders, SpongeBob said, Well, who knows? Anything's possible. Think of the incredible things we've already seen on this case. Glowing green ooze, ghost pirates, delicious homemade goober nut butter. Okay, Patrick granted. Maybe, just maybe, someone could train an Alaskan bullworm to dig tunnels for them. But why dig a tunnel out here? There's nothing around for miles. SpongeBob glanced around. The land under the darkening sky was empty. Patrick had a point. Where could this tunnel possibly lead? A gold mine? A treasure chest? Some kind of giant delicious underground root vegetable? He doubted it. And he thought of something else. What if they were just practicing? Practicing? Patrick repeated. What do you mean? To do something perfectly, you have to practice, SpongeBob continued. And when you're practicing, you don't want people to see you, especially if you're practicing something that's against the law. So you get out of town and go into the wilderness to practice. Patrick made a doubtful face. I don't think Alaskan bullworms have to practice digging tunnels. They're already pretty good at it. They're born that way. True, SpongeBob admitted. But what if you needed a trained Alaskan bullworm to dig you a tunnel on command? You seem kind of stuck on this train Alaskan bullworm idea, Patrick pointed out. I mean, who could train an Alaskan bullworm? Exactly, SpongeBob said, pointing his index finger at Patrick empathetically. That's what we need to figure out. Once we find the Alaskan bullworm trainer, we can find the Alaskan bullworm. And maybe the Alaskan bullworm will lead us to the mutant slug. From what I've heard, the only thing Alaskan bullworms lead you to is misery and destruction, Patrick said. Okay, he said, pacing again. What kind of person would you have to be in order to succeed as an Alaskan bullworm trainer? Patrick thought hard about it. Tough, strong, scary, foolish. Let's start with tough, SpongeBob proposed. I agree. It'd take a pretty tough person to train an Alaskan bullworms. So where do you go in Bikini Bottom to find a really tough person? They both stood there a moment thinking. The salty spittoon? Patrick suggested uncertainly. Yes! SpongeBob shouted. Stay tuned for Chapter 12, coming up soon.